Reminder about today's biology colloquium. This is, a senior seminar presentation by Evelyn Sanchez, Jordan Lehman, and Denisha Mataya on their senior seminar project related to electrical signaling that doesn't depend on a brain. So you're invited to come to that seminar right after class today. Practice your digestion of fats, carbohydrates, and protein. Okay, today, last class. So what are we going to do today? We're going to do some review, I guess, of the blood flow in the digestive system to discuss some of that complicated anatomy one more time, and then discuss some homeostasis. Try to use body homeostasis as a springboard to review some, not all, of the key concepts that we've talked about in this course. So here's an image from Gray's Anatomy. It is old, and it's not, so this is an interesting image because the stomach has been flipped up, right? So the stomach is not where it is, and I'm not even sure you could put it in this position, but this is an artist's rendition of what the system would look like if you cleaned it up and flipped the stomach up, right? So the stomach is upside down. So let's do some anatomy. I don't know if you can read it on your handout. What is this? What is this? What is this tube? That's the abdominal aorta. Abdominal aorta. Okay? What do we call this structure right here that is coming out of the abdominal aorta? Celiac trunk. And what is so the celiac trunk divides into 3 branches. What is this one going off to the right? Going off to the right. Hepatic. So this is the common hepatic. Artery. What is this one going off to the left, going all the way out to this thing out here? It's called, in the olden days it was called the renal. This is the splenic artery now. Renal is an old-fashioned name. This is the splenic artery. Okay, and then what's this 3rd branch from the celiac trunk that goes like this? So let's not worry about left or right just yet. What's its last name? Gastric. So the gastric. So this, remember the stomach is upside down, so this is the lesser curvature. This is the lesser curvature. The gastric artery feeds the lesser curvature. And this is the right, this is the left. Gastric artery. All right. Coming off of the splenic artery, what is this one here? That serves the greater curvature of the stomach. Gastroepiploic. artery. And this is the left side. And this is the right gastroepithelial artery. Okay, and then this thing, this tube that provides blood to the pancreas and to some of the, and to the duodenum here, which is not shown, but also provides blood to the right gastroepithelial, is called the, anybody? Gastroduodenum. Is it one in here or is it just me? All right. What is this one? That is going to join into the abdominal aorta behind this organ, which is the pancreas. All right. I think this one's the superior mesenteric artery. And in this cartoon, I think this one would be the inferior mesenteric. And those are many of the arteries that supply blood to the stomach, the spleen, the pancreas, and the intestines. Questions? Yeah. Greater curvature. The left greater curvature. Other questions?
Where is the gastroduodenal artery exactly?
This is the gastroduodenal coming off of the common hepatic. So this is the common hepatic. This is the gastroduodenal that provides an artery here that I'm not asking you to know the name of. I can give it to you if you want, but no, it's not a part of the assignment. But this one comes off of the right gastroepithelial comes off of the gastroduodenal. Well, it doesn't, so right there would be where that little bit that's hiding behind the stomach would be where the upper hepatic artery starts. Okay, so let's play a game with this slide. So this is now looking at the intestines. It's a different image. And we don't have to know all of them, but we do have to know some of them. So, what is number one? Wait. Number one. Superior mesenteric. And number 4 is pointing to the same thing. And number 6 is pointing to the same thing. I don't know why they did it that way. So 1, 4, and 6 in this cartoon are pointing to the superior mesenteric artery. Now maybe there's some anatomical distinctions between the distal and the proximal part of the superior mesenteric artery, but I don't even know what that would be. Okay, so number 13. What is this one? Pointing to the inferior mesenteric. Okay, not too hard. 15. The abdominal aorta. And what is it splitting into? What are these two arteries that the abdominal aorta terminates on in this split? The common iliac. The left and the right, common iliac arteries. And I believe that one is the name that's on your key concepts list. So that's fair game. There's some other ones here, like the colic. So all of these, they have specific names. I mean, they have specific, but they're all colic arteries. And I'm not gonna, that's a name that I think is on the list. We'll just double check that. I thought I brought the list. Oh, here it is. Common iliac is on the list. Colic, right, middle, and iliocholic, left, and sigmoid. Colic is a name to know. I'm not going to ask you to determine the difference between right, middle, and iliocholic, the right colic, the left colic, and the right colic, the middle colic, the left colic, the iliocholic, and the sigmoid colic. I'm not going to ask you to know those differences. But knowing that the arteries that feed into the inferior mesenteric and the superior mesenteric are the colic arteries. That's fair game. So this is blood flow to the intestines, right? The intestines have to receive arterial blood. This is how the intestines get it, from the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries and the colic arteries. And we're talking about the large and the small intestine. Any questions about that while I clean up? Okay. So let's play this game for the veins. Now remember, veins are really important here. This is what brings nutrients from the intestines, where you're digesting the food, you're getting those nutrients, the amino acids, the fatty acids, the sugars from the digestion of fats, protein, and carbohydrate. We got to get that. We got to get those goodies to the liver and to the rest of the body. So the veins are really important. So let's do this one. Okay. So there are some of these that I do want you to know, and some of them that you don't. So let's just go through the ones that you do need to know. What's number 1? Say again? Abdominal aorta. These are veins. That would be a wrong answer. Right. Inferior vena cava. Okay. Okay, what are 2 and 3? Gastric. Vein. Paralleling the gastric artery. And there's a left and a right. Remember, that's the left side, and this is the right side. 4. Say again? Me? I'll give you a hint. It parallels the artery that follows the same path. 4? No, it's not gastroepiploic. Where's it going? What organ is it going to? Spleen. So what's the name of or what's it coming, I guess I should say, what organ is it coming from? The spleen. So this is the splenic vein. 5 and 6. I think you already said the name of 5 and 6. Gastroepiploic, left and right. I don't know why I did this. Okay, so that's a typo. 7. Where is 7? Okay, what is 7? Inferior mesenteric. Okay, 8, 12, and 13. What would we? 8, 12, and 13. What do we call those? Colic veins. And they have specific, there's separate names, but we're not going to worry about them. Colic veins. Okay. Okay, 14. Superior mesenteric. 16. What do we call 16? Portal vein. And 17 and 18. What do we call those veins that feed into the inferior vena cava? In the liver. Remember, we're in the liver right now. Hepatic veins. Left and right. Okay, so those are veins to know. We're taking venous blood from the intestines to the liver. Well, most of this is taken. So the portal vein brings venous blood from the intestine to the liver. Branches of the portal vein then feed into the liver lobules, where the blood goes into those sinusoids and perfuses around the hepatocytes. The blood then collects in the central vein of the lobule, and those central veins then merge to form the hepatic vein, and then the hepatic vein goes to the inferior vena cava. What chamber of the heart does the inferior vena cava go to? Right atrium. And now you could be off and running on cardiac anatomy. Questions?
In the key concept list, I think we had.
We had what?
In the key concept list, I think we had like
Sigmoid is another, yes, that's right. So it's another branch of the colic.
Oh,
Okay, so right, middle, and ilio, left, and sigmoid are branches of the colic, but don't sweat. Don't spend any mental energy learning which ones of those are which. Just know that they're all called, they're all colic arteries. Okay? I'd rather you show me your knowledge of the big picture than these details. Okay, so here's the answer P, which is on Moodle, or will be soon. So, which includes the name for everyone. So, for example, 9, this is the sigmoid colic vein. And I mean, maybe some people just call it the sigmoid vein, but I think it's easier. I mean, it's the sigmoid colic vein. And what's another one? Right colic. So this is the right colic vein. And over here, 8 would be the left colic vein, right? Yeah. Don't do what I just did. Don't spend any energy focusing on that. Okay, so here's an interesting tidbit, and this will not be on any test, but we're talking about water homeostasis. So you drink and eat about 2 liters of water a day. Your saliva makes about 2 liters of water a day, pumps about 1.5 to 2 liters of saliva into the digestive tract. Your stomach pumps 2 liters of acid, acidified water, gastric acid, into the stomach. 1/2 liter of bile, 1.5 liters of pancreatic secretions. So if we didn't have a really good way to reabsorb that water that we were drinking and secreting into the digestive tract, we dehydrate in minutes, seconds, I think, right? So the point is the small intestine and the large intestine do an excellent job of recovering the water from all of those secretions. In addition to to absorbing nutrients, the intestines, both the small and the large, they have an important job of reabsorbing water, which is usually it's passive water flow following solute reabsorption, using the mechanisms that you learned about. Okay, so now I'd like to any questions about the digestive system and about the exam? So let's just take a break here for a moment. The final exam is at 10:30 on Monday. If you have another exam or another good reason that taking the exam on Monday is really going to be harmful to your well-being, then talk to me and I can be flexible about it. But I want to. It's not just I'm not going to be ready. That's not a really good reason. A really good reason is I've got a final exam in my philosophy class or something like that. Yeah.
How much time do they take the final?
It's I think the scheduled time is 2 hours, but it's not a timed exam. The only timed exam in this course is the practical quiz. So the final exam is on Monday at 10:30. The final exam will have a section that is really focused on the digestive system, because I haven't examined you on the digestive system yet. And so that's what there is a component of the final exam that is really just a section exam for this last section of the course. And then there's a component of the exam that is that integrates questions from the entirety of the course. So now what I want to do is use homeostasis to review, to refresh memory about some of these some things that would integrate these, right? I mean, so the cardiovascular system, you learned about it at the beginning of the class, and it has we've just spent a lot of time talking about the vasculature that feeds the digestive tract. So the cardiovascular system and the digestive system are closely linked. And that's what I mean by integrated. you've already seen questions related to the respiratory system and the kidney, how they integrate for control of pH. So that's the sort of thing that I know that when we learn this stuff, we learn it in compartments. And that's appropriate. But then at the end, I'd like to try to break down some of that compartmentalization and have you integrate knowledge from one compartment into another. That's my goal. So let's talk about this. So let's talk about homeostasis, control of a system. So for example, I find these things helpful. So for example, if we have a set point in this room, let's just say there is a controlled variable, the temperature in this room, and it's moderately well controlled. And there are systems that have power that control the temperature in this room. There is a heater and there's an air conditioner. And the thermostat controls the power to the heater and to the air conditioner, to the cooler. So for example, if the temperature gets cold, let's just say we don't mess with the thermostat. Say we leave the thermostat where it is, but we open a window. The temperature goes down. The power to the air conditioner goes down, and the power to the heater goes up, so that the temperature goes up goes towards the set point. If, let's just say we have a thermostat, it's set for 70 degrees, and we bring a heater in here, something that's not on the thermostat, or not controlled by the thermostat. It's just blasting heat. Temperature goes up, the power to the heater goes down, and the power to the air conditioner goes up, so that the temperature comes back towards the set point. So a thermostat is designed, thermostat with power to heaters and air conditioners, designed to try to maintain a set point. So that's a pretty intuitive example of what I mean by homeostasis, temperature homeostasis. And we actually have the same system in our body temperature. Your body has a set point, 37 degrees Celsius. If you get colder than that, it's called hypothermia. If you get hotter than that, it's called fever. We have a set point. And we have mechanisms for cooling, like producing sweat and evaporative cooling of the body by sweating. And we have ways of generating heat, thermogenesis, either generating heat from the brown fat in your body or actually shivering. So there's shivering and non-shivering thermogenesis. You can make heat. And so it's the same sort of idea. If you're immersed in ice water and you're getting hypothermia, you're not, all the power to whatever controls sweating would be down, like 0, and the power to try to create heat by non-shivering thermogenesis and shivering thermogenesis would go up in an effort to try to warm the body back to the set point. And if you're running a fever, well, no, let's not say fever, because let's say you go into a sauna. You're in a temperature that is dry heat of, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body is getting warm. It would start to sweat more in order to cool itself, and it would generate, low power to the thermogenesis mechanisms. You wouldn't be shivering, and your brown fat would not be generating heat in order to try to cool the body temperature. So we have a thermostat. It's in the hypothalamus. We have a set point for serum glucose. And insulin and glucagon are the two hormones that control serum glucose. So if you take in a meal, what happens to serum glucose immediately while digesting that meal? Goes up. What happens to insulin secretion by the endocrine pancreas? Increases or decreases? We've moved from the set point to a higher serum glucose because we were digesting a meal. So insulin secretion goes up. And we haven't covered this because this is part of the endocrine section of the class, but insulin causes muscle and fat to absorb glucose, which then causes the glucose concentration in the blood to go back down. So insulin helps control serum glucose by telling muscle, fat, and liver to absorb the glucose. And if you become hypoglycemic, bless you, if you become hypoglycemic, insulin secretion goes down and glucagon secretion goes up in an effort to release glucose from the liver and, mostly from the liver. The liver, all that glucose that was stored in the liver as glycogen is released into the blood to try to maintain serum glucose. Mostly so the brain gets the glucose it needs, because the brain doesn't have any intrinsic storage of glucose, doesn't have any glycogen. Okay, so I'm not going to test you on insulin and glucagon, that's endocrinology, but serum glucose is something we've talked about. And so when I say serum glucose, you should be thinking, okay, how did we get, when we digest a meal, what are the mechanisms for serum glucose increase? You should be thinking about things like amylase, and from saliva and from the pancreas. You should be thinking about the what are the sucrase and maltase and isomaltase that break down disaccharides into monosaccharides. You should be thinking about sodium glucose and sodium galactose transporters that bring the glucose into the intestinal cell, and you should be thinking about fructose uniporters that bring fructose into the intestinal cell. And you should be thinking about uniporters on the basolateral membrane that get the glucose, fructose, and galactose into the bloodstream. Right? So I just putting the word glucose up on the board got my brain running into how do we do that? That's what I recommend you do. Question?
So, from this graph was confusing to me when the serum glucose increases, for example, after a meal, the insulin level goes up, right?
Right.
But it seems like when the serum glucose is increasing, the insulin curve is coming back down to the set point.
Right.
I don't.
So the serum glucose concentration is going up. Insulin goes up. Insulin tells the muscle, fat, and liver cells to absorb glucose. And so this glucose concentration goes down back to the set point.
So the lines are not actually the levels of the
The lines are not the level of the glucose. The lines are the amount of power given to this system or to this system. So this is the amount of power, in quotes, given to the insulin system.
That makes sense.
If these graphs are not helpful for you, if it's just confusing, you don't need to use them. I'm not going to ask you to interpret one of these graphs, but knowing that glucose homeostasis is a thing and how we get glucose into the body is a big thing for this course. Did you have questions on that?
I'm just kind of confused about, so if the serum glucose goes up, insulin goes up, but that means you decrease the power of insulin?
No.
No?
So by power, I just mean amount.
Oh.
So if serum glucose goes up, the amount of insulin went up from here to here. That increase in the amount of insulin then causes the serum glucose to come down. And if we cross over the set point, then we're going to get to the other side of it, and it's going to be just the opposite thing going on, and so that's why we stay at the intersection of these two curves. Or we try to stay at the intersection. Obviously, there's oscillation. After a meal, it goes up, but then comes down. When we're starving, it goes down, where we try to maintain it even if we're starving. So let's talk about, okay, we'll just skip this, so because we're not talking about insulin. So let's talk about mean arterial pressure. What system am I thinking about here? Okay, renal is going to be part of it. Cardiovascular is clearly going to be part of this, controlling the blood pressure. So what are some of the, so if the blood pressure goes down, what is activated? If the blood pressure goes below the set point, for some reason. Well, let's talk about it. What are some of the reasons why the blood pressure, arterial blood pressure, measured in the brachial artery, why would arterial pressure go down? What are some of the reasons? Loss of blood, blood volume decrease. So decrease in mean arterial pressure could be caused by blood loss, hemorrhage. What else?
Is blockage?
Blockage?
Opposite.
Blockage of what?
The arteries.
No, that wouldn't, well, depends on the artery. So that- What's that?
Maybe dilation and
Ah,
dilation, constriction.
so decrease in mean arterial pressure could be, so I'm thinking systemically, blood loss,
Increase heart rate.
okay, decreased heart rate, okay, I'll buy it.
Decreased resistance from
Okay, decreased systemic vascular resistance. Decreased stroke volume, which both of these cause decreased cardiac output, so those are all decreased, that's all really related to cardiac output. Dehydration. It's not really blood loss if we're just losing water. So those are some of the major causes of it that could cause a substantial, measurable decrease in blood pressure. Okay, so in response to, let's just say in response, so this is going to get, let's just say in response to dehydration or response to blood loss. What, or let's just say a decrease in cardiac output. Sure, we can use that one too. In response to those things, what systems that you've learned about in the body would be activated? Give it some, so I'm down here, decrease in mean arterial pressure, a decrease from the set point. There are things whose activity has increased. What are some of those things? Okay. In diastolic volume is going to try to increase stroke volume. Vasoconstriction, sure. So vasoconstriction. Let's see what I had on my Answer Q. Okay, so far neither of these are what I had on my keys, but these are both correct answers. What's a system that would be activated? The sympathetic nervous system is going to get activated and that's going to do the things. End-diastolic volume will increase and vasoconstriction will happen at least some places due to the sympathetic nervous system.
Would more water be reabsorbed?
Well, okay. Would more water be absorbed? What are the systems that we use to absorb more water, to reabsorb more water? The renal. Tell me more.
So, more expression of aquaporin.
Okay.
Would lead to-
So what is vasopressin? Right, I'm going upstream from where you were. You were thinking about water reabsorption, then you were thinking about aquaporin, but vasopressin is the system that controls that. What's another system that controls water reabsorption? Again, it's got 3 letters. It's an abbreviation. It's an acronym that has 3 letters. Okay. Angiotensin is the middle letter. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system would be another system that would be activated to help reabsorb more water. Remembering that renin is the hormone enzyme that makes angiotensin from angiotensinogen. Now we've talked about the liver. So the digestive system actually has an impact in here because it's the digestive system, the liver, that provides the angiotensinogen. That is the starting point for angiotensin. And then angiotensin triggers the release of aldosterone. What does aldosterone do? More transporter in the renal loop of Henle, more building of that hypertonic interstitium, more osmotic gradient for the reabsorption of water. Okay, so the idea here, so things that, I'll just show you what I had on here. A decrease in blood pressure is associated with this activation of the sympathetic nervous system, activation of the vasopressin system, activation of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Those do these things, reverse these things that could cause this, as we've discussed. This is the parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system. So if the blood pressure goes high, the parasympathetic nervous system decreases heart rate, decreases contractility. So that's going to decrease heart rate, decrease stroke volume, don't get rid of it, of course, just decrease cardiac output. The parasympathetic nervous system is probably going to decrease resistance, vasodilate, allowing for a decrease in blood pressure, so we don't have a stroke. Okay, so there's a super complicated slide. Let's walk through this one, and then we'll take a break. Okay, you can do this. So this is the mechanism that we've just been talking about. Low blood pressure. We've talked about how that could happen. Here are the responses. So we haven't talked about baroreceptors, but we know that they're in the aortic arch and the carotid bifurcation. Right? We've talked about where the baroreceptors are that detect pressure. That's anatomy. That informs the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, here's the sympathetic nervous system. here are the neurotransmitters and hormones of the sympathetic nervous system. What is epinephrine? What is norepinephrine? Okay, so what do they do? Epinephrine and norepinephrine in the heart increase heart rate, increase contractility, so that increases the stroke volume, increasing cardiac output. What are the molecular mechanisms? Anybody want to tell me the molecular mechanisms that is embedded in this arrow right here? Molecular mechanism. So what's the first thing we need to do?
Like after neurotransmitters are released?
We've released neurotransmitters. What receptor? Let's come to consensus. I heard two letters. I think I heard a Q over here, and I think I heard an S somewhere. It's GS. Epinephrine and norepinephrine acting here on the heart, the GS story. So now your mind should be off and running on the GS story. Conformational change, GDP dissociation, GTP binding, alpha GTP bound dissociating from the receptor and from beta gamma, activating what? GS story. Adenylyl cyclase.
What is it? Like a beta adrenergic?
This is the beta adrenergic receptor. It's a GS coupled receptor. Okay, so we got to adenylyl cyclase, which does what? It hydrolyzes ATP to cyclic AMP, which activates what? Protein kinase A, which phosphorylates. Okay, so now we're going to remember protein kinase A. What channels? Okay, I don't have to do this to you. You haven't studied this yet, but you should, embedded in this arrow is a lot of cellular and molecular mechanism that you should review. Because this is part of homeostasis. This is part of how the sympathetic nervous system controls blood pressure. Okay, so this arrow is also connected to this box, and it causes vasoconstriction of arterioles. What receptor? GQ coupled receptor, which is called the alpha adrenergic receptor. So this is a GQ story, and this is a GS story. And you should be able to unpack those stories completely. I'm just giving you a heads up. And if you have questions about those stories, I'm happy to answer them now or over the weekend, anytime before you see the exam. In addition, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So now we have a line that's going behind these boxes and goes to this one, right? This line here is going behind these boxes, and now we're not in the heart anymore. We're in the kidney. Vasoconstriction of the, what is this? Knowing that we're going to get to this, what is this? The afferent arteriole. What receptor? GQ. Constriction of the afferent arteriole is going to reduce blood flow into the glomerulus and decrease glomerular filtration. Less filtration is going to help the body retain volume. Right? If we don't filter it, the volume is going to be higher. And that's going to help maintain stroke volume, and it's going to actually help maintain end diastolic volume that Kyril put up on the board earlier. So the sympathetic nervous system has multiple effects in the homeostasis of blood pressure. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so now this part of the story has been unpacked. Let's go straight to vasopressin. Right, the hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary releases vasopressin. What does vasopressin do? Let's unpack this term. What are we talking about? What do these abbreviations mean? Water permeability of medullary collecting duct. What receptor? GS coupled receptor. Remember, we have the whole GS story that leads to what? John said it earlier. Aquaporin expression in the apical membrane of the medullary collecting duct. More water permeability. More water reabsorption, more blood volume, more stroke volume. So we've gotten to the same point here as here, but by a different mechanism. Okay? And now, low pressure. What is JGA here in this abbreviation? Juxtaglomerular apparatus. What informed the juxtaglomerular apparatus in this setting of low blood pressure? This is the tricky one. Low flow in the distal tubule, low activation of complicated mechanism of the macula densa activating the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Let's not get bogged down into the paracrine signaling between the macula densa and the juxtaglomerular apparatus. The point is, the juxtaglomerular apparatus secretes what? Renin. And renin does what? Cuts angiotensinogen, which came from the what? Liver, into angiotensin 1. And then ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme, converted angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, which does several things. Angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor of the afferent arteriole, and we've already told that story. Angiotensin 2 also triggers the adrenal medulla to secrete aldosterone. And now we have increased expression of sodium pumps, so increased sodium transport, increased sodium reabsorption, increased concentration, solute concentration gradient in the medulla, increased reabsorption of water, blood volume, stroke volume. So we've got the same story going on here, except with yet another backstory mechanism. So you can see low arterial pressure. We've got a cardiovascular thing going on here. We've got a renal thing going on here. We've actually got there's a bit of the digestive system going on here. It's integrating. Let's take a break. This slide is just did I give you this one also? Yes. So this is just a text version of what we just covered. So I'll leave this one up there during the break, but let's take a break. And we've got a couple more things to do. Let's see. I'm happy to go through this, but I think this slide is pretty self-explanatory, right? We're controlling mean arterial pressure by controlling heart rate, stroke volume, and resistance. And here are the things that control heart rate, stroke volume, and resistance. I'm happy to go through it, but I think you should be able to unpack this slide on your own. Let's talk about blood pH. So what systems are we thinking about here when we think about blood pH? What does this, what do we call this thing? Davenport diagram. What systems have we focused on when we talk about the Davenport diagram? Respiratory and renal. Okay, so now let's use this new idea of a set point to talk about blood pH. We have a set point, 7.4. This one is very tightly controlled. Blood pressure can go up and down. Temperature can go up and down within range. pH can go up and down, but not very far. Not very far. So if blood pH goes up, what is activated? What system is activated? Blood pH is going up. What system is activated? The renal system. What is it doing? Bicarbonate is retained or excreted? Excreted, right. So in this case, we would talk, let me use a pen that has some ink in it. This would be the kidney bicarbonate excretion. That's the more kidney bicarbonate, more bicarbonate excretion by the kidney, by the mechanisms that you should know about, right? Decreased expression of, let's see if we can do this together. Decreased expression of hydrase, decreased expression of bicarbonate transporters, decreased expression of proton transporters in the renal tubule. All of those would lead to increased excretion of filtered bicarbonate. Yeah.
Could the respiratory system like also be activated just because the pH is increased, or is it just the renal system?
Okay, well, let's do the other half. If the pH goes down, acidosis. So that's alkalosis, this is acidosis. What is activated in acidosis? The respiratory system. So what happens? What do we call the response of the respiratory system? An increase in if we have acidosis, am I doing this right? Sometimes I get confused myself. If we have increased acid, what are we trying to do here with the respiratory system? Are we trying to retain carbon dioxide or exhale carbon dioxide? We're trying to get rid of more carbon dioxide through, what does the lung do to get rid of more carbon dioxide? Increased ventilation. So now, Jasmine, so the point is that if the pH goes down, the respiratory system responds by an increased ventilation. And the kidney responds by a decreased bicarbonate excretion.
So you
If
have
the
like
pH goes up, alkalosis, the kidneys respond by an increased bicarbonate excretion, and the respiratory system, it's the same line, the respiratory system responds by a decreased ventilation. So this one is a beautiful example of of this system working together to control blood pH. And you should be able to map the changes from a Davenport diagram, which you are an expert on. No, I mean you should be able to map this concept onto a Davenport diagram. I'm not going to ask you to interpret one of these, but I really could ask you to interpret one of these. Is that clear? Are there questions about this system? So, and then you should be able to, but remember, what we just did was big picture. You should be able to unpack in great molecular detail the systems, right? We did this a little bit for the kidney about increasing bicarbonate excretion. But you could be challenged with the system, how do we decrease bicarbonate excretion? Well, that's sort of the reverse of what we just did. You could be challenged with what causes the respiratory system to increase ventilation? What do we have to do for the respiratory system to increase ventilation? Breathe more, faster and deeper. How do we do that?
Oh, the question is not clear.
The question is not clear.
Essence, fire, but like essence, that.
Oh, I'm not going to say that that's wrong, but it's not. What do we have to do in order to inhale and exhale faster and deeper? Muscles. Okay, now we're good. Now we're off and running. What muscles do we have to work faster and harder? Diaphragm, external intercostals for inspiration, internal intercostals for expiration, rectus abdominis, sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, right? So all of that anatomy that you learned is now informing a very important physiological concept, increasing ventilation by increasing the rate and strength of contraction of those muscles. That's how we do it. Did we, so, some of you who have taken AMP1 should be able to unpack that even further. How do we increase the contraction of the diaphragm? What are the molecular mechanisms of that? All of you have had self-is, so in principle, I could ask you that question, but I'll be honest, I'm not going to. Okay, so ventilation and bicarbonate excretion. We just did this. This is the answer key that's up on movement. I think there's one more case. Okay, so here, now we're talking about the control of stomach pH, gastric pH. If the stomach pH goes up, how would the stomach pH go up? What would you have done to cause the stomach pH to go up? You ate something. You just diluted the acid. The acid is getting diluted because you've just put some stuff into it. So that would be after a meal. What would what would be increased in the setting of a meal to try to recover the pH back to its set point of pH 2, acidic pH? So what, I'll be honest, what hormones are we talking about here? Gastrin is a hormone that increases the secretion of stomach acid. Molecular mechanisms? What cell type? Parietal cells. Molecular mechanisms? Increased expression in the apical membrane of proton pumps. Okay, so you can unpack what gastrin does. I haven't been writing it on the board, but it's in your brain somewhere. It's now your challenge to find it and bring it out. What else? What other hormones? Histamine. And one other. It's actually a neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine. So if the pH goes up because you've just put some stuff in your stomach, gastrin, histamine, and acetylcholine concentrations go up, activating the parietal cell to secrete more acid to bring the pH of the stomach down because we're re-acidifying. If the pH goes down, more acidic than it should be, what do we activate? Okay, so if the pH goes down, more acidic than it should be, gastrin and histamine and acetylcholine are turned off, turned down, and somatostatin, CCK, and secretin are activated because they inhibit the production of stomach acid by the parietal cells. Okay, so here's a system that has its own sort of intrinsic homeostasis. But remember that gastric pH affects blood pH. So the digestive system, the respiratory system, and the renal system are all talking to each other with regard to blood pH. Did I just say stuff that rings a bell? Remember, if the stomach is pumping acid, the stomach is pumping acid into the lumen of the stomach, the body is becoming more alkaline. The stomach is pumping more acid into the stomach. The body is becoming more alkaline. And we have responses. Decreased ventilation, increased kidney bicarbonate. That's what happens during the gastric phase of digestion. In the intestinal phase, the pancreas is pumping a bunch of bicarb into the digestive tract. So in principle, the pancreas is also compensating for the gastric phase, and might actually cause an acidification of the body because we're pumping bicarbonate into the digestive tract if you ate a really big meal. This is a phenomenon, it's got a name, it's called the alkaline tide. When you eat a big meal, your body becomes alkaline because we've pumped a bunch of acid into the stomach, and then later it becomes more acidic as the pancreas pumps more bicarb into the intestines. So it's a tide, it's a increase and a decrease following a meal. Increase in pH, alkalinization of the body, and then a decrease in the pH, acidification of the body. And then the kidneys and the respiratory system respond to this alkaline tide of the digestive system. So again, it's really amazing. The digestive system and the kidney and the respiratory system are all talking to each other, making changes in serum pH. So that's what's on the Moodle. I mean, the PowerPoint will be on Moodle. I think I'm done. AMP. Yeah, AMP. There it is. So enjoy studying both for the digestive system and for putting this all together for the final exam on